My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 59, a widow, and I live alone in a modest house tucked between rows of evergreens in a quiet part of Oregon. Some people think quiet is boring. To me, it was hard-earned. Peace was never something I was handed. I built it, one coffee-stained morning at a time. For nearly 2 decades, I've worked as an office manager at a law firm that smells like old paper and fresh brewed coffee. It's not glamorous. It's not a dream job. But it gave me what I needed when life collapsed. Structure, stability, and just enough routine to keep the grief from swallowing me whole. My husband Mark passed away when our children were still in high school. One day he was here helping Luke study for his algebra exam, and the next I was standing in a sterile hospital room, signing papers with shaking hands and no clue how I'd pay the mortgage the next month. But I did pay it, and every other bill that came after. I raised Emily and Luke mostly alone. There were nights I wanted to scream into the silence of our kitchen. Nights when I ironed clothes at midnight after finishing a shift, just to make sure they wouldn't feel the weight I was carrying. I used to tell myself I wasn't sacrificing. I was just doing what mothers do. That love, the real kind, doesn't need recognition. It just does. But the thing about invisible sacrifices is, sometimes they stay invisible, even to the people you make them for. Last Tuesday, I opened my email like I always do. Nothing fancy, no dramatic music, just the soft click of a mouse, the low hum of my heater, and a warm mug of coffee in my hand. Then I saw her name, Emily. No subject line, just Emily, my daughter, my firstborn, the girl I had rocked through endless colicky nights and stood beside at every broken-hearted call, job rejection, and quarter-life meltdown. I smiled instinctively. I thought maybe it was a wedding update, a thank you note, maybe even a picture of the dress she finally picked. Just weeks before we were laughing on the phone about florists and table arrangements, I had already sent $30,000 to help secure the venue she dreamed of since college. Napa Valley, lavender fields, chandeliers and string lights and vintage wine. I wanted it to be perfect for her, not because she asked. She never had to. I volunteered, like I always did. That's what love looked like to me. So I opened the email. And in the space between one breath and the next, my world shifted. It didn't start with "Dear Mom," not even "Hi," just "Mom," cold, clinical, like a label on a folder. She said that after a long discussion with Andrew, her fiancé, and his family, they had finalized the guest list. And I wasn't on it. They decided it would be best if I watched the wedding via live stream. She mentioned Andrew's mother being particular. She used words like intimate, exclusive, and delicate guest balance. Then came the sentence that will live in the echo of my mind longer than I care to admit. You can watch through the Google Meet link we've created. Should be just like being there. LOL. LOL. Laughing out loud. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring at the screen, the warmth draining from my coffee, and something deep inside cracked. Not with noise, not like a shatter. More like the subtle, sickening snap of a bone under pressure that's been silently fracturing for years. I thought of every birthday party I planned alone, every time I skipped my own meals to afford theirs, every time I stood at their plays and soccer games and graduations with tears in my eyes and pride in my chest, and now I was a liability to their aesthetics. I took a deep breath, replied with 4 words, "Sure, enjoy your big day." That was it. No guilt, no begging, just silence. And I knew, deep down in that still place we all carry but rarely visit, those 4 words would echo louder than any scream ever could. That morning, I drove to work like a woman walking through fog. I passed the same oak trees I passed every morning, listened to the same soft hum of local radio, but everything felt different. I wasn't angry, not yet, just emptied. Like someone had reached in and quietly removed something sacred without my permission. I kept asking myself the same question. How did we get here? And then I began to realize we didn't get here. I walked us here. One step at a time, one unspoken need, one overlooked betrayal, one silent act of love that I never asked to be seen, and now I was invisible. When I arrived at the office, Robert, my boss, stopped by with a latte. He always remembered how I liked it. Almond milk, no sugar. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked, and I almost broke. Not because of what he said, but because someone saw me. That silence, felt like the first kind thing I'd received all day, maybe all week. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Emily. Her name lit up the screen like a spotlight I didn't ask for. Voicemails, texts. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." This isn't funny, but it wasn't funny. It wasn't even sad anymore. It was awakening. I didn't answer. Not yet. I just sat there staring out the window of the break room, the trees dancing in the breeze, and I thought, maybe it's time I stopped being the one who always answers. Maybe it's time I stopped showing up to stories I wasn't invited into. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start showing up for myself. I've always believed that love was sacrifice. That if you gave enough, forgave enough, bent enough, eventually someone would see you. That your children of all people would notice the woman behind the quiet acts of service, the meals made without asking, the bills covered without complaint, the silence kept to avoid conflict. But that Tuesday, sitting in my office, my daughter's voice haunting my inbox with LOL still echoing like a taunt, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to say out loud. Maybe I had raised them to expect me, not love me. It was a painful realization and one that took its sweet time settling into my chest. But once it did, I felt something else. Resolve. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to call her back and plead for a seat at a table I had helped build. I was done playing the part of the good mother who swallowed everything just to keep the peace. No, I was going to do something far more powerful. I was going to act. After work, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to First Federal Bank, a small brick building I'd visited more times than I could count over the years. Carlos, the branch manager, had been there since my kids were in middle school. He'd watched me open savings accounts, close joint ones after Mark died, set up college funds and emergency reserves. He always greeted me with a warm smile and a quiet respect that made me feel, if only for a moment, like I wasn't just surviving, I was building something that mattered. "Mrs. Collins," he said, rising from his desk to shake my hand, "what can I do for you today?" I sat across from him, calmly placing my purse on the floor. "I need to cancel a wire transfer." He blinked. "The one to the Napa venue?" I nodded. "Yes, that one." He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "There may be a cancellation fee, depending on when it was processed. May I ask why?" I looked him in the eye. The circumstances have changed. And that was all I needed to say. As he typed, I stared out the window. Spring in Oregon is a strange thing. The trees bloom bravely even when the air still bites. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They just grow. That day, I felt like one of them. Fragile, yes, but finally ready to bloom in the face of cold. Carlos tapped a few keys, then looked up at me. "You're in luck. It hasn't processed yet. Just in time." He paused. "Are you sure, Mrs. Collins? $50,000 is a significant amount." I nodded. "I'm sure." $50,000. That was the amount I had planned to send next. On top of the $30,000 already gone. $80,000 for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. A wedding I was supposed to watch through a screen like a stranger. I signed the paperwork with steady hands. There was no drama, no tears, just quiet freedom. And as I left the bank, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying began to lift from my shoulders. When I arrived home, my phone buzzed in rapid succession. 9 missed calls from Emily, 2 from Luke. One voicemail simply read, "Mom, please don't do this." But they were too late. They didn't understand that it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about being seen, about choosing peace, about reclaiming my right to be more than someone's background support system. I poured a glass of wine, a bottle I had saved for Thanksgiving dinner that never happened because Emily had to work. I took it out to the porch and watched the light fade across the tops of the trees. And the memories came in waves. Birthday parties I planned alone. Holidays where I waited for calls that never came. The shoes I didn't buy. The car I drove until it rattled. The weekends I gave up. And somehow, through all of that, I never thought I would end up here. Not excluded by accident, but deliberately. I wasn't part of her world anymore. I was an inconvenience. That realization cut deeper than any insult ever could. I thought about Andrew's mother, the woman I'd met twice, who now held more sway in my daughter's life than I did. A woman whose version of family meant excluding the one person who had walked with Emily through every season of her life. I thought about how Emily signed off her email with LOL, like it was a joke, as if asking your mother to sit out of your wedding, the one she helped fund, could ever be funny. And then I stopped thinking about Emily. For the first time in a very long time, I thought about myself. Not as a mother, not as a widow, just as a woman. What did I want? I wanted peace. I wanted dignity. I wanted a life that didn't revolve around being useful to people who only reached for me when their hands were empty. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a scene. I wanted space. And that night, I took the first step toward claiming it. Not with words, not with drama, but with one simple decision. I would no longer fund my own erasure. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:03 p.m. I remember the time because I was still holding my glass of wine, still sitting on the porch in the last light of the day, wondering what it meant to reclaim your own life after giving so much of it away. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people didn't drop by unannounced anymore, not since Mark passed, not since the kids had grown up and built lives that barely touched mine. But something in my gut told me who it was even before I stood up. It wasn't Emily. She didn't have the courage to face me in person. It was Luke. He stood there on the front step, still in his work clothes. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves rolled up like he'd been pacing in his car before ringing the bell. He looked uncomfortable. Not angry, yet. Just unsettled. "Mom," he said, stepping inside before I could say anything. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Emily's freaking out." I closed the door behind him gently. "Hello to you, too." He sighed and started pacing, phone still in hand like it might serve as some kind of shield between us. "She says you're not coming to the wedding now, that you're being difficult." Difficult. That word lingered in the air like smoke from a fire I didn't start. I took a slow sip of wine and sat down in my favorite chair, the one with the creaky armrest and the worn cushion that still smelled like cinnamon from last Christmas. "Difficult," I repeated, "for not attending a wedding I wasn't invited to?" Luke stopped pacing for just a second. Then he shifted again, clearly searching for the right words. "Andrew's parents are footing most of the bill, Mom. You know how traditional they are. Small ceremony, specific seating. They're very particular." I raised an eyebrow. "Traditional," I echoed. "I've already paid $30,000, Luke. I was about to send $50,000 more. That's not tradition. That's a buyout." He froze. "Wait," he said. "You were sending another 50? "Was," I said calmly, "but not anymore." His face went pale. "Mom, they're counting on that. The venue, the food, the—" "Not my problem anymore," I interrupted. There was no venom in my voice, no heat, just fact. He looked like I had slapped him. "Of course it's your problem," he snapped. "She's your daughter." I set my wine glass down with care, like I was afraid the noise might shatter the thin line of patience I was walking. "I'm her mother," I said quietly. A mother who was told to stay home and watch through a screen. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. His voice got louder. "You always make everything about yourself." And that was the moment something inside me shifted again. Not broke, not snapped, just released. I stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just deliberately. "Get out of my house, Luke." He blinked, stunned. "What?" "You heard me. Get out." "Mom." "No," I said, firmer this time. "I've given everything I had, time, money, love, my entire self, and I'm done being the villain in a story I wrote with love." He stood there for a second longer. Then, like a scene from a play neither of us rehearsed, he turned, walked to the door, and left. The click of the latch behind him was soft, but it felt louder than any slam. And here's the strange part. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. I felt free, like I'd taken off a costume I didn't know I was wearing, like I'd finally stepped out of the wings and onto a stage where I could speak my own truth. I stood there in the stillness of my living room, listening to the quiet settle in around me. For years, I'd filled this house with love, with holiday dinners and birthday decorations and late-night tea after breakups. I'd filled it with presents. But tonight, it was silence that wrapped around me, and that silence, it was mine. The next morning, I woke to 43 missed calls and a flood of frantic texts. Most were from Emily. The first few dripped with passive-aggressive guilt. "Mom, we need to talk." "Why are you doing this?" "This is childish." Then the tone shifted. "The venue just called. The payment didn't go through. We're going to lose everything if we don't pay by tomorrow." "Andrew's parents are furious. They said this proves they were right about you." And at 3:24 a.m., the message that made me exhale with something like peace. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me." Of course she didn't. Emily had grown up with my sacrifices so seamlessly stitched into her life that she never thought to question the thread. The comfort, the safety, the money, the emotional labor. She assumed it would always be there. That I would always be there. Until I wasn't. And now she was feeling something I had felt for years. Invisible, rejected, powerless. Except I wasn't being petty. I wasn't getting even. I was reclaiming. Later that morning, while reviewing contracts at my desk, I received another email. Subject line, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I opened it without expectation. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. "If we don't pay by end of day Paris time, the caterer walks. Andrew's parents are beyond upset. They say this proves you can't be reasoned with. Please don't do this. We can talk about you attending the ceremony, but we need the funds first." There it was. Now that the money was gone, my presence was negotiable again. I closed the email and turned back to my work. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Robert, my boss, asked if I wanted to get lunch. He had done it a few times before, usually out of politeness, but I always declined. Too busy, too tired, too used to saying no to anything that didn't feel productive or necessary. But something in me was different that morning. Maybe it was the silence from the night before. Maybe it was the weight I'd finally put down. Or maybe it was the simple desire to sit somewhere that didn't ask anything of me. A place where I could exist without giving. So I said yes. We went to a new Italian place a few blocks from the office. Warm lighting, the smell of garlic and fresh bread, quiet tables tucked into corners. I sat across from Robert, who talked about his grandchildren, how exhausting but beautiful they were, how he missed Sunday dinners, how he worried he'd forget the names of all their stuffed animals. His voice was soft, real, not performative, not masked with politeness. I'm just human. At one point, he paused, took a sip of his espresso, and said gently, "Forgive me, Margaret, but you seem lighter today." I didn't expect to, but I told him everything. About Emily. The email, the wedding, the money, the confrontation with Luke, the silence I had chosen instead of submission. He didn't interrupt, he didn't try to fix it, he just listened. And when I finished, he reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes the hardest part of love is setting boundaries, especially with the people we've given the most to. I blinked back tears, not from sadness, from recognition. Someone saw me, not as a mother, not as a worker, just as a person who had reached her edge and honored it. When I returned to my desk, my phone had dozens more messages, missed calls, more emails, more pleading, more anger disguised as concern, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, my silence was saying everything. That evening, I drove home under a sky the color of slate and lavender. A soft drizzle tapped against the windshield, but I didn't mind. Oregon rain had always felt like an old friend, one who didn't ask questions, just wrapped you up and let you be. The porch light clicked on automatically as I pulled into the driveway. Everything looked still, peaceful. And then I saw her. a figure sitting on my front steps. At first, I thought it might be Emily. But as I got closer, I recognized her. Sophia. Sophia had been Emily's best friend since 5th grade. She'd spent countless weekends at our house growing up, making cookies in my kitchen, whispering secrets under blankets, crying over middle school drama and high school heartbreak. I hadn't seen her in years, but there she was, grown now, still young, still carrying the echoes of a girl who used to call me her second mom. She stood up quickly, brushing invisible lint from her coat. "Mrs. Collins," she said softly, "I'm sorry to drop by like this." I opened the door. "It's fine," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" She followed me into the kitchen, familiar steps into a house that once held her laughter. Her eyes scanned the walls like they were remembering a version of herself that had once lived here on weekends. I put the kettle on, poured water, waited, then finally asked, "Emily sent you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "She's a mess," she said. "They lost the venue. The florist dropped out. Andrew's parents are threatening to cancel the whole wedding." I didn't respond, just placed 2 mugs on the counter. "She knows she messed up," Sophia continued. "She just doesn't know how to fix it." I looked at her. This girl who once wore glitter on her eyelids and ran barefoot through my hallway. "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "To fix it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I'm here to ask. Is there anything she can say or do that would change your mind?" I paused, and the silence stretched long between us. Was there? Would an apology undo the sting of being excluded? Would it heal the wound of being used like a credit card with a beating heart? Would it erase the moment I realized my daughter only valued me when I was useful? No, not anymore. "There isn't," I said quietly. Sophia's shoulders slumped. "Not even if she apologizes?" I handed her the mug of tea. "Words are easy, Sophia, especially when people are desperate. But people who love you, they don't wait until you cut them off to see you." Sophia looked down into her cup, then nodded slowly. "I get it," she said, "even if she doesn't." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins." "You don't need to be," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment. 2 women from different generations, connected by one hard truth. Sometimes love has limits. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Sophia didn't stay long. She didn't beg. She didn't blame. She just hugged me gently, whispered thank you, and walked back into the night. And I finally closed the door on a version of myself I had long outgrown. The wedding never happened. Not the way they had planned, anyway. They tried. Oh, how they tried. Emily and Andrew scrambled for alternatives, made frantic calls to other venues, begged vendors for last-minute accommodations. But it turns out, planning a fairy tale wedding without fairy tale money isn't so easy. According to Luke, they ended up hosting a modest backyard ceremony 3 weeks later. Just a few relatives. Andrew's parents, a DIY arch with silk flowers and folding chairs from the garage. I wasn't invited. And for the first time, I didn't need to be. There was no dramatic text from Emily, no last-minute apology, just silence. A few pictures surfaced on social media. Emily in a simple white dress, Andrew in a rented suit. Her smile was still beautiful. She's always had that. But something in her eyes looked different. Not regret, not guilt. Just the realization that something was missing. Something that couldn't be bought, replaced, or retaken. And me? I spent that Saturday morning gardening. There was a patch of overgrown hydrangeas in the backyard I'd been meaning to trim for months. I wore gloves, played old jazz on the radio, and let the sun warm my back as I worked in silence. It felt peaceful. No pangs of grief, no ache in my chest. Just the simple satisfaction of doing something for me. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new kind of routine. One that didn't revolve around answering every need that came my way. I still worked, still paid bills, still answered the occasional call from Luke, though now those conversations were shorter, polite, distant. But something in me had shifted. I stopped waking up bracing for guilt. I started sleeping better, deeper, as if my body had finally stopped preparing for the next demand, the next sacrifice, the next call that would ask me to shrink just a little more. And then, about 6 weeks later, it came. One final email from Emily. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." But it wasn't really an apology. It was more like a soft echo of the girl I used to raise. A girl trying to make sense of a mother who had suddenly stopped showing up with open arms and open wallet. She wrote, "I know you're hurt. I know I didn't handle things well. I felt overwhelmed. Andrew's parents have strong opinions. I wanted everything to go smoothly. I thought live streaming was a compromise. I didn't think it would feel like rejection to you. I'm sorry you felt left out." That line made me pause. I'm sorry you felt left out. Not, I'm sorry I left you out. There's a difference. And it told me everything I needed to know. She continued, "We lost the venue, the caterer. Everything fell apart. I was angry at first, at you. But then I started thinking about all the things you've done for me, for Luke, and I realized maybe I've taken you for granted. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if you want me to, but I hope we can talk one day. I miss you." I read it once, then archived it, not out of spite, not to hurt her, but because I had already said my piece, not with words, but with silence. And that silence had healed something deeper than her apology ever could. People think letting go means burning bridges, but sometimes it just means putting the match down and walking away from the rope that's been tearing your hands open for years. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was done. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to prove your worth to people who were never paying attention. When you stop measuring your love by how much pain you're willing to endure. When you finally stop hoping someone will say thank you for the decades you spent being invisible. In the quiet of those post-wedding weeks, I made a new rule for myself. If my presence is negotiable, then so is my effort. No more bending myself into pieces to fit into spaces that refuse to honor me whole. I started saying yes to different things. Yes to long walks by the lake. Yes to Friday night book clubs at the local library. Yes to a pottery class where I made the ugliest mug I've ever seen and smiled like it was made of gold. Yes to dinners with old friends who didn't ask what I could give, but wanted to know how I was really doing. Yes to evenings on my porch with red wine and silence that no longer hurt. I even said yes to Robert's suggestion that I take a vacation, first one in over a decade. And through all of that, I discovered something simple and profound. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. There's something sacred about starting over when no one's watching. No applause, no validation, no dramatic turning point, just waking up one day and deciding, I deserve more than what I've settled for. That's what it felt like. The days after I archived Emily's final email. Quiet, still, not triumphant, not bitter, just real. I began noticing things I hadn't in years. The way light spilled through the blinds in the morning. The softness of my sheets when I made the bed just for me. The smell of jasmine tea steeping in the kitchen. Not for a guest, not for a child, just because I liked it. These moments were so small they would have slipped through the cracks of my old life unnoticed. But now they felt like a kind of grace. I bought a new journal. The cover was plain. Deep navy, linen texture, no fancy quotes. Inside, I started writing things I had forgotten to ask myself. What do I enjoy? What makes me feel alive? What would I do if no one needed me? They were simple questions, but answering them felt like learning a new language, one where I was finally the subject, not just the supporting clause in someone else's sentence. I tried things I never had time for before. Pottery class on Thursdays. My first bowl came out lopsided and heavy, but I loved it like it was art. Hiking group on Saturdays. I met women who had stories like mine, full of quiet sacrifices and late-blooming self-love. Italian cooking class on Zoom. I burned the lasagna but laughed so hard I cried. None of it was impressive. None of it was Instagram-worthy. But it was mine. One afternoon, while browsing a used bookstore, I ran into Sophia again. She was picking up a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves. We smiled. No awkwardness, just warmth. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You look happy." I laughed. "I'm learning to be." She nodded. "She's still figuring things out, Emily." "I know," I said. "I hope she finds peace too. We didn't talk about the wedding, We didn't need to. Some wounds don't need to be reopened. Some closures happen in silence. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with my journal and reflect. Not just on the past few months, but on a life lived in service of others, and what it meant to finally choose myself. There were no fireworks, no big cinematic music, just stillness. And that stillness felt like coming home. I began to understand something I wish I had learned when I was 30. Self-love isn't selfish. It's the soil that allows everything else to bloom. I had spent so long believing that my worth was tied to how much I gave, how quiet I stayed, how flexible I could be for others. But now I saw the truth. My worth was never meant to be earned. It was inherent. The women in my pottery class started inviting me to brunch. One of them, Teresa, was 62 and divorced after 40 years. She wore red lipstick and told jokes that made us cry laughing. I lost everything, she told me once over coffee. But then I realized I was never the one being loved. I was just convenient. I nodded. I know that feeling, I said. She smiled. But isn't it something to finally become inconvenient and still feel whole? That sentence stayed with me for weeks. To become inconvenient. To stop molding yourself to fit the needs of everyone else. To let your edges stay sharp instead of sanding them down for harmony that doesn't feed your soul. That's what I was learning to do. Not to be cruel, but to be whole. Luke called one evening. Just once, no voicemail. I didn't answer. I knew it wasn't anger anymore. It was distance, a new rhythm, a new boundary. One I didn't place out of revenge, but out of love. For me, there's a particular kind of strength that comes when you realize you can be alone without being lonely. I thought I'd fear this phase of life, this empty house, this silence, this space. But instead, I'm discovering it's where my life actually begins. Not as a mother, not as a widow, but as Margaret. It started with a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. Cream-colored envelope, handwritten address. My name in Emily's familiar script. A little shaky, like she hadn't written it in a while. No return address. I stood at the mailbox with it in my hands for a long time, just looking, holding it like it might bite or burn or maybe break me all over again. But it didn't. I opened it. It wasn't long, maybe a page and a half, but it said more than any of her previous emails combined. There was no LOL, no passive aggression, no justification. Just words that felt like they cost something. I don't know if I deserve a response. I don't know if I even deserve to be forgiven. But I need to tell you that I see it now. All of it. I see how much you gave and how much I took. I'm sorry, Mom. Not because I lost money, not because the wedding fell apart, but because I lost a version of you I never appreciated when I had her. There was a pause in the middle of the page. Then, you didn't raise me to be this thoughtless, and I don't want to stay this way. If you're willing, I'd like to come by. No expectations, just a visit. Just me. Just your daughter. She signed it with a shaky, "Love, Emily." I placed the letter on the kitchen table and made tea. Not because I needed to process, but because I wanted to respond with the same deliberate stillness I had finally learned to live by. This wasn't a crisis. This wasn't an emergency. It was an invitation. And for the first time in years, I was the one with the choice. A week later, she came. No grand arrival, no suitcase, no makeup. Just Emily, my daughter. The girl I once rocked to sleep with lullabies and now sat across from like a fragile truth I'd finally stopped chasing. She looked thinner, tired in a way you only get when regret lives in your bones. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one she used to do homework at, the one where I stayed up late balancing bills and writing checks I never thought twice about. She looked around like everything was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had just gotten big enough to finally see it clearly. "I was wrong," she said, "about everything." I didn't interrupt. "I thought you'd always be there, no matter what. That's not love, that's entitlement." I nodded, still silent. "I hurt you," she whispered. "Yes," I finally said, "you did." The words hung in the air between us, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. She started to cry, and I let her. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because real reckoning only comes when someone finally feels what you've been feeling all along. I thought the money was love, she said, because that's how it always came. Quiet, consistent, no questions asked. That was my mistake, I said, teaching you that love meant sacrificing myself. She looked at me with wet eyes. I don't want that kind of love anymore, she said. I want the kind where we see each other, really see each other. And this time, I didn't doubt her, because something in her voice had changed. It was no longer the sound of a child demanding more. It was the sound of a woman discovering the cost of not seeing her mother as a person. We didn't fix everything that day. There were no hugs and violins, just tea, long pauses, and the soft rebuilding of a bridge that could only be crossed on foot, one step at a time. But I did something I never thought I would do again. I forgave her. Not because she earned it, but because I was tired of carrying the weight of her ignorance. And forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about erasing pain. It's about choosing not to let it rot your soul from the inside out. As she left, she turned to me at the door. Can I come by again? I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I smiled gently and said, let's just take it one step at a time. We didn't talk every day, not even every week. But about 2 Sundays after that visit, Emily texted me a photo. It was a cake, lopsided, clearly homemade, iced with uneven swirls of chocolate and what looked like strawberries that had seen better days. The caption read, "Tried your old recipe, failed epically, but it reminded me of home." I stared at that photo longer than I expected, not because of the cake, but because it was the first time in years that she'd remembered something small and beautiful about the life we once had together. A life where love wasn't dressed in money or obligation, just sugar, flour, and the comfort of my kitchen. I replied simply, it's not failure if it made you feel something. That's how it began. Small moments, a text, a recipe, a question about a favorite book I once read, an offer to go grocery shopping together. Nothing grand. But healing rarely is. It's not the fireworks, it's the quiet, the everyday grace of someone showing up a little better than they did the day before. Emily came by again a few weeks later. No expectations, just tea. She brought me tulips. My favorite. I hadn't told her that in years. She noticed the pottery I'd made, the ugly, wonderful bowl I kept on the table. You made this, she asked. Yes, I love it. I do too, I said, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine. She nodded. I get that now. She didn't ask to move backward. She didn't pretend nothing happened. And that, more than anything, gave me room to breathe. Because too many people think forgiveness means forgetting. It doesn't. It means remembering without reopening the wound. It means saying, I see the past and I still choose peace. One afternoon, we sat on the porch in silence. No small talk, no emotional download. Just the sound of birds and breeze. She looked out at the street and said quietly, sometimes I think I learned how to love by watching you, and how not to love by taking you for granted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths are best left unspoken, not because they're too painful, but because their power lies in being acknowledged, not explained. The rebuilding didn't erase the hurt. It honored it. We didn't pretend the scar wasn't there. We just stopped picking at it. And somewhere between the cake photo, the flowers, and that afternoon on the porch, I realized I wasn't rebuilding the same relationship. I was building a new one that didn't ask me to disappear inside it. Luke, on the other hand, was quiet, still distant, still unsure what to do with a mother who didn't bend the way she used to. He texted on my birthday, short, polite. I replied warmly but with space. Not out of punishment, but because I finally knew the value of not chasing people who only see your worth when you're useful. I kept journaling, and one evening I wrote, peace is not the absence of pain, it's the absence of self-betrayal. That line sat with me like a truth I had waited a lifetime to write. I had betrayed myself in small, subtle ways for years, ignoring the exhaustion, downplaying the disrespect, excusing the silence. But not anymore. Now, even when I loved from wholeness, not from hunger. Emily offered to cook dinner one night. The chicken was dry, the rice was burnt, but the laughter, real. We sat at the table she once stormed away from as a teenager and just talked. Not as mother and daughter trying to heal some rift, but as two women learning each other again. And this time, I didn't serve. I didn't fix. I didn't disappear. I received. And she gave. Even if it was just overcharred rice and overcooked chicken, it was enough. There's something strange about joy when it finally comes back to you. It doesn't knock. It doesn't burst through the door. It just arrives quietly. You're folding laundry. You're stirring a pot of soup. You're walking past your reflection and realizing you don't flinch anymore. And that moment, that small, sacred moment, is when you realize you are no longer surviving. You are living. That was what the past few months had become for me. Not a fairy tale. Not a second chance. Just a return to myself. A woman who had learned to give without losing, to forgive without forgetting, to rebuild without begging. And somewhere along the way, I stopped keeping score. Because healing isn't about balancing the books. It's about closing the chapter and realizing the story still goes on. Emily still visited, not every day, but often enough. We talked about things we never had time to before. Books, childhood memories, the way the light always hit the kitchen sink at exactly 4:17 p.m. in spring. She was different now, less defensive, more curious, more willing to sit in discomfort instead of filling it with noise. And I was different too. No longer searching her face for approval, no longer giving just to be needed, no longer afraid of being alone. One Sunday morning, we went to the farmer's market together. It was Emily's idea. She picked flowers, I picked pears. There was a folk singer playing near the edge of the square, and for a moment it felt like we were two women just being. Not fixing, not performing, just being. Later that week, she sent me a message I'll never forget. I finally understand something you said months ago, that love without boundaries is just self-erasure. I never saw your boundaries as love until now, but they were. They always were. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like, even when it hurt. I didn't cry when I read it. I smiled, because I wasn't waiting for her to say it anymore. But hearing it, it was full circle. Luke came by one afternoon, unannounced. He stood on the porch like he did that night months ago, only this time he looked different. Smaller, somehow, not in shame, but in softness. I brought pie, he said. I know you hate store-bought, but I remembered you like cherry. He paused. I'm sorry I raised my voice. I didn't know how to deal with you, being strong. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because he'd earned it, but because I had space. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. We just ate pie and watched an old movie in the background while the dog barked down the street and the afternoon light streamed through the window. And that was enough. I thought healing would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like gentleness, like looking in the mirror and saying, I know who you are. I love who you are. You don't have to fight anymore. I started planning a trip, not for a wedding, not for anyone else. For me, a solo trip to Santa Fe, pottery retreats, art galleries, desert air. I told Emily, and she didn't guilt me. She just smiled and said, send me pictures. As I packed, I found an old photo tucked in a drawer. It was from years ago. Emily and Luke on the front porch, covered in popsicle stains, laughing so hard they were falling over. And there I was behind them, blurry in the background, holding the door open, watching. I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled, because now I wasn't in the background anymore. There's a moment, somewhere between letting go and moving on, where you realize you didn't lose yourself. You simply left pieces of you in places where you were never meant to stay. And now you've come home. Santa Fe was warm in a way that wasn't just temperature, it was soul deep. The air smelled like sage and sun and something ancient. I walked through art galleries alone. I ate lunch without checking my phone. I watched the sky shift from orange to lavender to deep indigo, and not once did I feel the urge to explain myself to anyone. There were no questions to answer, no expectations to fulfill, no roles to play. Just me. At the pottery retreat, we sat in a circle of women. Some widows, some newly divorced, some just tired of carrying invisible weight. We shaped clay in silence. Let it spin on the wheel. Let our hands speak what our voices had learned to suppress. Mine came out uneven again. But this time, I didn't laugh at it. I didn't try to fix it. I loved it just as it was. Because that bowl wasn't trying to be perfect. It was just honest, like me. One evening, under the stars, a woman named June, 68, sharp as a blade, heart like an open field, asked me, "What did you come here to find?" And I said, "Nothing, I came here to stop looking." She smiled. That's when it finds you. On the last day, I wrote one last entry in my journal. I used to think love was what I gave away. Now I know. Love is also what I keep for myself. When I returned home, the porch light clicked on automatically. I stepped inside. The house didn't feel empty. It felt spacious, like a place that had been waiting for its owner to return. And I had, not the woman who said yes to everything, not the one who believed she had to earn her seat at the table, but the woman who had finally built her own. Emily visited the next weekend. She brought fresh-baked bread, warm, misshapen, imperfect. I tried again, she said, handing it over. Still lopsided. Just like mine, I said, smiling. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't look like closure. Sometimes it looks like continuing anyway. Luke texted more now, less obligation, more honesty. He sent me a picture of a book he was reading. Said, "Thought of you." I replied, "I'm glad." That was it, and that was enough. Some people think love is a soft thing, but I disagree. Love is the quiet choice to keep living, even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything you once thought you needed. It's making dinner for one and setting the table anyway. It's walking through silence and not begging it to speak. It's lighting a candle, not for romance or religion, but just to honor the fact that you're still here. So if you're listening, and maybe you've been the one in the background your whole life, if you've bent so far you forgot the shape of your spine, if you've loved until there was nothing left and still been told you weren't enough, let me tell you this. You were never meant to disappear to be loved, and you never had to prove your worth by how quietly you suffered. You are allowed to choose yourself, not once, not as a rebellion, but as a rhythm, because the greatest love story, it isn't the one where someone finally sees you. It's the one where you finally see yourself and stay.